The brass coins clinked in Eliza's worn leather pouch as she counted them for the third time that morning. 3 shillings and 6pence. Not nearly enough for another week's rent in the cramped room she shared with 2 other servant girls above the bakery. She pressed her lips together and tucked the pouch deep into her apron pocket. The Duke of Ravenshollow's library paid better than scrubbing floors at the inn, even if the work meant hours of silent dusting while the master of the house remained locked away in his study. She slipped through the servants' entrance of Ravenshollow Manor just as the morning bell chimed 7 times. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hartwell, barely glanced up from her ledger as Eliza hurried past the kitchen toward the east wing. The library doors stood 15 feet tall, carved with intricate roses and thorns that seemed to twist in the flickering candlelight. Eliza had cleaned those doors every day for 3 months, but they still made her breath catch. Inside, the library stretched up 3 stories with balconies wrapped around each level. Books lined every wall from floor to ceiling. Some were bound in rich leather with gold lettering. Others looked ancient, their spines cracked and faded. The morning light streamed through tall windows and painted golden rectangles across the Persian rugs. Eliza loved this room more than any place she had ever been, though she would never admit such a thing aloud. She gathered her cleaning supplies from the small cupboard near the entrance and began her routine. Dust the lower shelves first, then move the rolling ladder from section to section to reach the higher books. The Duke had very specific rules about his library. No book was to be moved more than necessary. No pages were to be opened. The cleaning was to be done in complete silence before 9 o'clock each morning, when His Grace would emerge from his study to begin his research. Eliza had seen the Duke only a handful of times in the 3 months she had worked here. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that always looked as though he had been running his fingers through it. His clothes were fine but rumpled, as if he cared more about his books than his appearance. The servants whispered that he rarely left the manor, that he spent his days and nights reading texts that no one else could understand. Some said he was writing a book of his own, though no one knew what about. She climbed the ladder to dust the second level, moving carefully along the narrow balcony. These books were older than the ones below. Their titles were written in languages she did not recognize, though some looked like Latin. Eliza had learned to read Latin years ago, back when she lived with the vicar and his wife, before her world had crumbled and she had been forced to find work wherever she could. The memory made her hands tremble slightly as she reached for a particularly dusty volume. The book slipped from the shelf and fell open in her hands. The pages were made of thick parchment, and the text was written in flowing Latin script. Without thinking, she began to read. De antiquis ritibus et mysteriis temporum, she whispered, then caught herself. The words had slipped out before she could stop them. She looked around quickly to make sure no one had heard, then carefully closed the book and returned it to its place on the shelf. "What did you just say?" The voice came from directly below her. Eliza's heart lurched, and she gripped the ladder so tightly that her knuckles went white. She looked down to see the Duke of Ravenshollow standing at the base of the ladder, his dark eyes fixed on her face. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up and a dark waistcoat that hung unbuttoned. His hair was even more disheveled than usual, as if he had been up all night. "Nothing, Your Grace," Eliza managed to say. "I was just dusting." "You were speaking Latin." His voice was quiet but firm. "I heard you quite clearly." Eliza's cheeks burned with embarrassment and fear. She had broken the most important rule of her employment. She was supposed to be invisible, silent, nothing more than another piece of furniture in his precious library. Now she had revealed herself to be something else entirely, and she was certain to lose her position. "I apologize, Your Grace," she said, climbing down the ladder as quickly as she dared. "It will not happen again." "Wait." The Duke stepped closer, and Eliza found herself trapped between the latter and his tall frame. He smelled like leather and ink, and something else she could not identify. What did the passage say? Eliza stared at him in confusion. Your Grace, the Latin passage you just read. What did it say? She swallowed hard. There was no point in lying now. It was about ancient rituals and mysteries of old times, Your Grace. The beginning of what looked like a treatise on historical religious practices. The Duke's eyes widened slightly. You understood it. You actually understood what you were reading. Yes, Your Grace. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if seeing her for the first time. Eliza kept her eyes fixed on the floor, waiting for him to dismiss her. Instead, he walked to the nearest shelf and pulled out another book. This one was even older than the first, its leather binding cracked with age. Read this, he said, opening the book to a random page and holding it out to her. Eliza glanced up at him uncertainly, then looked down at the page. The Latin was more archaic than the first book, but she could make out the meaning. It appears to be a passage about the construction of Roman aqueducts. Your Grace, the author is describing the engineering methods used to transport water across long distances. The Duke closed the book with more force than necessary. How, Your Grace? How does a servant girl learn to read Latin? Classical Latin, at that. Your pronunciation is nearly perfect. Eliza's throat felt dry. She had spent 3 years carefully hiding her education, knowing that it would only bring her trouble. Educated women of her class were viewed with suspicion, as if learning had somehow made them unfit for honest work. But there was something in the Duke's expression that made her think he might be different. I lived with a vicar and his wife when I was younger, Your Grace, she said carefully. They had no children of their own, and they taught me to read and write. The vicar said that knowledge of Latin was essential for understanding history and theology. What happened to them? They died of fever when I was 17, Your Grace. I had nowhere else to go. The Duke nodded slowly, as if this explained everything. He walked to his desk, which was covered with open books and scattered papers. Eliza could see that many of the texts were in Latin, though some appeared to be in Greek or other ancient languages. I have been working on a translation project, he said without looking at her. A collection of Roman texts that have never been properly rendered into English. The work has been challenging. Eliza remained silent, unsure of how to respond. The Duke picked up one of the papers from his desk and stared at it for a moment before setting it down again. How long have you been cleaning my library? He asked. 3 months, Your Grace. And in that time you have never once looked at the books, never been tempted to open them and see what they contained. Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks again. I have looked at them, Your Grace, but only while cleaning. I would never presume to what? To read them. He turned to face her fully. Miss Thornfield, Your Grace. Eliza Thornfield. Miss Thornfield, I find myself in need of an assistant, someone who can help me with my translation work. The position would pay considerably more than cleaning services, and the work would be far more interesting. Eliza stared at him in shock. Your Grace, I could not possibly. Why not? I am a servant, Your Grace. I have no formal education, no credentials. What would people say if they learned that you had hired a common girl to assist with scholarly work? The Duke's mouth curved into what might have been a smile. Miss Thornfield, I care very little for what people say. What I care about is finding someone who can help me complete this project before I lose what remains of my sanity. Are you interested or not? Eliza's mind raced. The offer was beyond anything she had dared to dream, but it was also dangerous. If word spread that she was working as the Duke's assistant rather than his cleaning woman, it would surely reach the ears of those who might remember her past, those who might recognize her name. What exactly would the work involve, Your Grace? Translation, primarily. I have been working with a collection of Roman texts that chronicle the daily life of citizens during the reign of Marcus Aurelius. The Latin is complex, and many of the passages reference cultural practices that require extensive research to understand properly. I need someone who can not only translate the words, but help me grasp their deeper meaning. And you believe I could do such work? Miss Thornfield, in the past 3 months, you are the first person I have encountered who could read those texts without stumbling over the pronunciation. That suggests to me that your education was far more thorough than you are letting on. He was right, of course. The vicar had been a brilliant scholar, and he had taught her not just Latin, but Greek, theology, history, and literature. She had devoured every book in his extensive library, and had often helped him prepare his sermons and research his own theological writings. But that was a lifetime ago, when she had still believed that learning could protect her from the cruelty of the world. If I were to accept such a position, she said slowly, I would require your word that my past would remain private. There are those who might object to my presence here if they knew my true circumstances. The Duke's expression grew serious. You have my word, Miss Thornfield. Your personal affairs are your own. Eliza took a deep breath. The coins in her pocket seemed to weigh nothing at all compared to the opportunity before her. Then, yes, Your Grace, I would be honored to assist you. Excellent. You may begin immediately. He gestured toward the desk. These are the texts I have been working with. Perhaps you could start by reviewing my translation of this passage and letting me know if you think I have missed any nuances. Eliza approached the desk cautiously. The papers were covered with the Duke's handwriting, which was surprisingly neat for someone who looked as disheveled as he often did. She picked up the first page and began to read. Your Grace, she said, after a moment, I believe there may be an error in this section. Oh? You have translated familiar as family, but in this context I think it refers more specifically to the household slaves. The passage is describing how the slaves were organized within a wealthy Roman home, not discussing blood relations. The Duke leaned over her shoulder to look at the text, and Eliza caught that scent again, leather and ink, and something warm that made her pulse quicken. You are absolutely right, he said. I have been struggling with that passage for weeks. They worked in companionable silence for the next several hours. Eliza found herself completely absorbed in the ancient texts, her mind delighting in the challenge of rendering the Latin into clear, readable English. The Duke proved to be an excellent collaborator, asking thoughtful questions and offering insights that helped illuminate particularly difficult passages. When Mrs. Hartwell rang the bell for the midday meal, Eliza looked up in surprise. The morning had passed like minutes. I should return to my other duties, Your Grace, she said, beginning to gather the papers. Miss Thornfield, the Duke said, I think we should discuss the practical arrangements of your new position, Your Grace. You can hardly continue to live in servants' quarters while serving as my research assistant. It would not be appropriate, and more importantly, you will need access to the library at all hours. Some of the best translation work happens late at night when the mind is quiet. Eliza felt a flutter of panic. Your Grace, I could not possibly live in the main house. The other servants would think. There is a small apartment above the library, he said, cutting her off gently. It was designed for a librarian or scholar in residence. It has been empty for years, but it could be made ready for you within a day or two. That is very generous, Your Grace, but I fear it would cause talk. Miss Thornfield, if you are to be my assistant, You must learn to care less about what others think. Scholarship requires a certain amount of independence from social conventions. There was something in his tone that made her look at him more closely. She realized that he was probably as much an outsider in his own world as she was in hers. A duke who cared more about ancient Roman texts than the social obligations of his position would be viewed with suspicion by his peers. "Very well, Your Grace," she said. "If you think it best." "I do." "And Miss Thornfield?" "Yes." "Your Grace, when we are working together, you may call me Adrian. All this, Your Grace business becomes tiresome when we are deep in discussion about Roman engineering practices." Eliza felt her cheeks warm again. "I could not possibly." "You could, and you will. How else are we to have proper scholarly debates?" The apartment above the library was larger than anywhere Eliza had ever lived. It consisted of 2 rooms, a sitting area with a small fireplace, and a bedchamber with tall windows that looked out over the Manors gardens. The furniture was simple but well made, and there were bookshelves built into every available wall space. Mrs. Hartwell supervised the cleaning and preparation of the rooms with a disapproving expression that she did not bother to hide. "I do not understand why His Grace needs a servant girl to live above the library," she muttered as she directed the housemaids to air out the bedding. "Perhaps because I am no longer serving as a cleaning woman," Eliza said quietly. Mrs. Hartwell fixed her with a sharp look. "And what exactly are you serving as, Miss Thornfield?" "His Grace's research assistant." The housekeeper's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "Research assistant? What manner of research could a duke possibly need that requires the services of a girl from the servant halls?" Eliza did not answer. She had learned long ago that explanations often created more problems than they solved. Instead, she focused on arranging her few belongings in the wardrobe and trying to ignore the whispered conversations that followed her wherever she went in the house. By evening, she was settled in her new quarters with a stack of texts that Adrian had asked her to review. She lit the oil lamps and settled into the comfortable chair by the fireplace, opening the first book with a sense of deep contentment. For the first time in 3 years, she felt like herself again. She had been reading for perhaps an hour when she heard footsteps on the stairs leading to her apartment. A moment later, there was a soft knock on her door. "Miss Thornfield, may I come in?" "Of course, Your Grace." Adrian entered carrying a tea tray and looking slightly embarrassed. "I thought you might be hungry. Mrs. Hartwell mentioned that you had not come down for dinner." "That was very thoughtful of you." Eliza set aside her book and gestured toward the small table by the window. "Though I must say, it is highly irregular for a duke to serve tea to his assistant." "I seem to have a talent for irregularity," Adrian replied, setting down the tray. "How are you finding the accommodations?" "They are wonderful, far more than I deserve." "Miss Thornfield, you must stop saying such things. You deserve to be comfortable, and you certainly deserve to be treated with respect." There was something in his voice that made her look at him more carefully. He was pouring the tea with the careful precision of someone who was not entirely comfortable with domestic tasks, and she realized that he had probably dismissed his own servants rather than ask them to bring her a tray. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked impulsively. Adrian paused in his tea pouring and met her eyes. "What do you mean? You could have any scholar in England to assist with your translations, men with degrees from Oxford and Cambridge, with published works and sterling reputations. Instead, you have chosen to help a servant girl who cannot even reveal her true circumstances. Why?" He was quiet for a long moment, apparently considering his answer. "Perhaps because I understand what it means to be judged by circumstances rather than merit," he said finally. "And perhaps because in the past 3 months you are the only person I have encountered who shares my genuine love of learning." What do you mean about being judged by circumstances? Adrian handed her a cup of tea and settled into the chair across from her. My father died when I was 22, Miss Thornfield. I inherited the title and the estate, but I had no interest in politics or society. I wanted to continue my studies, to pursue scholarship. Do you know what the other members of Parliament said when I declined to take my seat in the House of Lords? Eliza shook her head. They said I was weak, unfit for leadership, a disappointment to the family name. They expected me to marry quickly and produce heirs, to take up the traditional pursuits of men of my station. Instead, I locked myself away with my books and became known as the eccentric Duke of Ravenshollow. That must have been difficult. It was liberating, actually. Once I stopped trying to meet their expectations, I was free to pursue the work that truly mattered to me. Eliza sipped her tea and studied his face in the lamplight. There was something almost boyish about his enthusiasm when he spoke of his work, despite the serious nature of their conversation. "What is it that you hope to accomplish with these translations?" she asked. "I want to publish a comprehensive collection of Roman daily life accounts," he said, his eyes lighting up. "Most of the existing translations focus on military campaigns or political events, but these texts I have been working with describe ordinary citizens, merchants, artisans, women managing households. They provide a completely different perspective on Roman society." "That sounds fascinating." "It is. And it is also something that could help bridge the gap between classical scholarship and popular understanding. Too many people think of ancient Rome as nothing but gladiators and emperors. I want to show them the fuller picture." They talked for another hour about the project, about the challenges of translation and the excitement of discovering new insights in ancient texts. Eliza found herself completely absorbed in the conversation, her mind engaging with intellectual challenges in a way it had not done since her days with the vicar. When Adrian finally took his leave, she sat by the fire for a long time, staring into the flames and trying to process the dramatic change in her circumstances. This morning, she had been counting coins and worrying about rent. Tonight, she was living in comfortable quarters and discussing scholarly projects with a duke who treated her as an equal. It was too good to be true, which meant it was probably too good to last. The next few weeks fell into a pleasant routine. Eliza would wake early and spend the morning hours working on translations while her mind was fresh. Adrian would join her around midday, and they would review her work together, debating difficult passages and researching historical context. The afternoons were spent organizing their findings and preparing clean copies of completed translations. Eliza had never been happier. The work challenged her intellectually in ways she had forgotten were possible, and Adrian proved to be not only a brilliant scholar, but also surprisingly good company. He had a dry sense of humor that emerged when they encountered particularly amusing passages in the ancient texts, and he seemed genuinely interested in her opinions and insights. The servants, however, were another matter entirely. Word had spread quickly through the household that the new cleaning girl had somehow managed to elevate herself to a position of importance with his grace. The whispers followed Eliza wherever she went, and she often caught maids and footmen staring at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. "It is not natural," she heard one of the kitchen maids say as she passed through the servants' hall. "A girl like that, putting on airs and thinking herself better than her betters." "Mark my words," replied another voice, "she will come to a bad end. Girls who try to rise above their station always do." Eliza tried to ignore the talk, but it weighed on her more than she cared to admit. She had lived through enough upheaval to know how quickly circumstances could change, and she could not shake the feeling that her current happiness was built on very unstable ground. Her fears proved justified 3 weeks into her new position. She was working alone in the library one morning, struggling with a particularly difficult passage about Roman religious rituals, when Mrs. Hartwell appeared in the doorway with a stern expression. "Miss Thornfield, there is a gentleman here to see you." Eliza's blood turned cold. "To see me? He says he is a vicar from the village of Millbrook. He seems to know you quite well." The book slipped from Eliza's hands and fell to the floor with a loud thud. Millbrook was where she had lived before coming to work at Ravenshollow Manor. If someone from her past had found her here, it could only mean trouble. "Did he give his name?" she managed to ask. "Reverend Morton, I believe he said." Eliza closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Reverend Morton had been a friend of the vicar who had raised her, but he was also a man with very strong opinions about proper behavior for young women. If he had come looking for her, it was not to offer assistance. "Where is he now?" "I have placed him in the morning room to wait for you. His Grace is out riding, but he should return soon." That was something, at least. If she could speak with Reverend Morton before Adrian returned, she might be able to convince him to leave without creating a scene. "Thank you, Mrs. Hartwell. I will go to him immediately." Eliza smoothed her skirts and made her way to the morning room with as much composure as she could manage. Reverend Morton was standing by the window with his back to the door, his hands clasped behind him in a pose that brought back uncomfortable memories. "Reverend Morton," she said quietly. He turned to face her, and she saw that the years had not been kind to him. His face was thinner than she remembered, and there were deep lines around his eyes and mouth, but his expression was as stern and disapproving as ever. "Miss Ashworth," he said, "or are you still using the name Thornfield?" Eliza felt her careful composure begin to crumble. "I do not know what you mean, Reverend. Do not take me for a fool, child. I have been searching for you for nearly 3 years. When I heard that a young woman matching your description was working in this household, I knew I had found you at last. What do you want?" "I want you to return to Millbrook with me immediately. There are matters that must be resolved, debts that must be paid." "I have no debts in Millbrook." "Your late guardian had debts, Miss Ashworth. Debts that became your responsibility when he died." Eliza stared at him in shock. "That is not possible. The vicar was a careful man with his finances. The vicar was a gentle soul who trusted too easily." Reverend Morton replied coldly. "He made several loans to members of his congregation that were never repaid. When he died, those debts became part of his estate, which he left to you. But I never accepted the inheritance. I had nothing to do with his financial affairs. Nevertheless, the law is clear. You are responsible for settling his debts before you can claim any assets from his estate." Eliza's mind raced. She remembered now that there had been some mention of legal matters when the vicar died, but she had been so overwhelmed with grief and the sudden loss of her home that she had fled rather than deal with the complications. "How much?" she asked quietly. "Nearly £50. The amount hit her like a physical blow. £50 was more money than she could hope to earn in years, even with her new position as Adrian's assistant. "I do not have that kind of money." "Then you must return with me and work off the debt. I have arranged for you to take a position with a family in London. They are in need of a governess, and they have agreed to pay your wages directly to the creditors until the debt is settled." A governess. Eliza felt a bitter laugh escape her lips. And what family would hire a governess with no references, no credentials, and a scandal attached to her name? Reverend Morton's expression grew even colder. "The scandal is of your own making, Miss Ashworth. If you had not fled in the night like a common criminal, these matters could have been resolved years ago. I was 17 years old and had just lost the only family I had ever known. I was frightened and alone. You are old enough to understand your responsibilities, and you are certainly old enough now to face the consequences of avoiding them. Eliza sank into the nearest chair, feeling the weight of her past crushing down on her. Everything she had built here, everything she had hoped for, was about to disappear. How long would it take to work off the debt? Several years, I should think. The family is not wealthy, and governesses are not well paid. Several years of servitude to pay for debts she had never incurred, to satisfy obligations she had never agreed to take on, and at the end of it, she would be older, with no prospects and no hope of ever pursuing the kind of intellectual work that had brought her so much joy. "I need time to consider," she said finally. "There is nothing to consider. You will return with me today, or I will be forced to involve the magistrates. The choice is yours, Miss Ashworth." "What is going on here?" Both Eliza and Reverend Morton turned toward the door. Adrian stood in the doorway, still wearing his riding clothes and looking thoroughly displeased. "Your Grace," Reverend Morton said, attempting a bow, "I am Reverend Morton from the village of Millbrook. I have come to collect Miss Thornfield. There are legal matters that require her immediate attention." Adrian's eyes moved from the Reverend to Eliza, taking in her pale face and obvious distress. "What sort of legal matters?" "Debts, Your Grace, Miss Ashworth. That is, Miss Thornfield is responsible for settling the debts of her late guardian." "I see." Adrian stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind him. "And these debts are how much?" "Nearly £50, Your Grace." "I see. And you propose to resolve this matter how?" "Miss Ashworth must return with me to work as a governess until the debt is paid." Adrian was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he walked to his desk and opened a small drawer. £50, you said?" "Your Grace, you do not understand." Eliza began. "I understand perfectly, Miss Thornfield." Adrian pulled out a leather pouch and began counting coins onto the desk. "Here is £60, 50 for the debt, and 10 for your trouble, Reverend Morton." Reverend Morton stared at the pile of coins in shock. "Your Grace, I could not possibly accept." "You can and you will. Miss Thornfield is under my protection now, and I will not have her dragged away to work off debts that she had no hand in creating." "But, Your Grace, the propriety of the situation is none of your concern." Adrian's voice had taken on a distinctly dangerous edge. "Miss Thornfield is my employee and a valued member of my household. If you have any objections to my handling of her legal affairs, you may take them up with my solicitor." Reverend Morton looked from Adrian to Eliza and back again. He clearly wanted to object further, but the Duke's expression made it clear that argument would not be welcome. "Very well, Your Grace," he said stiffly, "but I hope you understand the position you are placing yourself in by sheltering a young woman of questionable reputation." "Miss Thornfield's reputation is spotless as far as I am concerned," Adrian replied coldly. "Good day, Reverend Morton." The Reverend gathered up the coins with obvious reluctance and took his leave. As soon as the door closed behind him, Eliza burst into tears. "Miss Thornfield, Eliza, what is it?" Adrian was beside her chair in an instant, kneeling down so that he could look into her face. "You should not have done that," she sobbed. "You do not understand what you have gotten yourself into." "Then explain it to me." Through her tears, Eliza told him everything about her real name, about the scandal that had driven her from Millbrook, about the years of hiding and the constant fear of being discovered. "The vicar and his wife took me in when I was 14, she said. "My parents had died of consumption, and I had nowhere else to go. They were kind to me, kinder than I deserved. They treated me like the daughter they had never had." What was the scandal that Reverend Morton mentioned? Eliza's cheeks burned with shame. "There was a young man in the village, the son of a wealthy merchant. He paid me attention, and I was foolish enough to believe that his intentions were honorable. What happened? He convinced me to meet him in secret. He said he wanted to marry me, but that his father would never approve unless I could prove my devotion to him. Adrian's expression darkened. He took advantage of you. I was willing, Eliza said miserably. I thought I was in love with him. I thought he loved me. And then, when I told him that I might be with child, he denied everything. He said I was lying, trying to trap him into marriage above my station. His father threatened to have me arrested for attempted extortion. Were you? With child, I mean? No, but by then it did not matter. The story had spread through the village. Everyone knew what had happened, or thought they did. The vicar tried to protect me, but people began to whisper that he was harboring a fallen woman. Some even suggested that he had improper feelings for me himself. So you ran. I could not bear to bring any more shame on the people who had been so good to me. I thought if I disappeared, the talk would die down and they could go back to their normal lives. And instead, the vicar died with these debts hanging over his estate. I should have stayed. I should have faced the consequences of my actions instead of running away like a coward. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. Eliza, you were 17 years old and had been cruelly deceived by a man who should have known better. Running away was not cowardice, it was survival. But the debts are settled. You are free of them. I cannot let you pay my obligations. It is not right. It is done. Adrian stood and walked to the window, staring out at the gardens. Besides, I have my own selfish reasons for wanting to keep you here. What do you mean? I mean that your work on the translations has been extraordinary. You have insights that I never would have reached on my own. If you leave now, I will never be able to complete the project. Eliza wiped her eyes and tried to compose herself. You are being kind, but we both know that you could find another assistant. I could find someone with credentials and references, yes, but I could not find someone who brings the same passion and intuition to the work that you do. You understand these texts in a way that goes beyond mere technical knowledge. That is very generous of you to say. Adrian turned back to face her. It is not generosity. It is the truth. They looked at each other across the room, and Eliza felt something shift between them. The air seemed charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Your Grace, Adrian, I must ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Of course. Is your interest in keeping me here purely professional? Because if it is not, then I must leave immediately. I will not allow myself to be placed in a compromising position again. Adrian's face went very still. What exactly are you asking me? I am asking if you have developed feelings for me that go beyond those appropriate between an employer and his assistant. The silence stretched between them for what felt like hours. Finally, Adrian spoke. Yes, he said quietly. I have. Eliza's heart began to race. Then I must go. Why? Because I cannot trust my own judgment where men are concerned. Because I have already made one terrible mistake that ruined my life and hurt people I cared about. Because the difference in our stations makes any attachment between us impossible. What if none of that mattered? What if the only thing that mattered was how we feel about each other? But it does matter. You are a duke, Adrian. I am a servant with a scandalous past. Even if your feelings are genuine, even if mine are as well, there is no future for us. Why not? Because the world will not allow it. Because your family and friends will never accept me. Because I will always be waiting for the next Reverend Morton to appear at your door with some new revelation about my past. Adrian crossed the room and knelt beside her chair again. "Eliza, look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his, and the intensity she saw there made her breath catch. "I do not care about your past," he said. "I do not care what people say about your station or your reputation. What I care about is the woman I have come to know over these past weeks. The woman who can read ancient Latin as easily as she reads English. The woman who challenges my ideas and makes me think about things in new ways. The woman who brings light and laughter into this dusty old library. Adrian, you do not understand." "I understand that I am falling in love with you," he said simply, "and I hope that you might be falling in love with me as well." Eliza's composure finally crumbled completely. "Of course I am," she whispered. "How could I not be? But that does not change anything. Love is not enough to overcome the obstacles between us. Then we will overcome them together. How? I do not know yet, but I know that I am not willing to give up without trying." He reached out and gently touched her face, wiping away the tears that had begun to fall again. "Will you trust me enough to let me try?" Eliza closed her eyes and leaned into his touch. Every rational part of her mind was screaming that this was madness, that she was setting herself up for heartbreak and ruin. But her heart was stronger than her reason, and her heart was already his. "Yes," she breathed. "I will trust you." Adrian smiled then, the first truly joyful expression she had seen on his face since she had known him. "Then that is enough for now." He kissed her then, gently and carefully, as if she were made of something precious and fragile. It was nothing like the urgent, demanding kisses she remembered from her past. This was a promise, a beginning, a declaration of intent. When they broke apart, Eliza rested her forehead against his and tried to catch her breath. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we continue our work on the translations," Adrian said, "and we see where this path leads us. And if it leads nowhere good, then at least we will have had this moment. At least we will have tried." The next several weeks passed in a haze of happiness and uncertainty. By day, Eliza and Adrian worked side by side on the translations, their professional collaboration deepened by the growing intimacy between them. By evening, they would sit by the fire in her apartment or walk through the gardens, talking about everything and nothing. Adrian was careful to maintain propriety in public, but when they were alone, he was affectionate and attentive in ways that made Eliza's heart sing. He brought her books from his personal collection, flowers from the garden, small gifts that showed he was thinking of her. More importantly, he listened to her thoughts and opinions as if they truly mattered to him. The servants' gossip grew more pointed as the weeks passed. Mrs. Hartwell made disapproving comments about the amount of time His Grace spent in the library, and the housemaids whispered about the impropriety of a young woman living unchaperoned, so close to the master of the house. "Let them talk," Adrian said when Eliza expressed her concerns. "They have nothing better to do with their time." But Eliza knew that gossip had a way of spreading beyond the confines of a single household. If word reached the wrong ears, it could spell disaster for both of them. Her fears proved justified when Lady Margaret Ashford arrived for an unexpected visit on a cold morning in late October. Lady Margaret was Adrian's cousin, and the closest thing he had to family, which gave her both the right and the inclination to meddle in his affairs. Eliza was working in the library when she heard the commotion of arrival in the main hall. She looked out the window and saw an elegant carriage drawn by 4 matched horses, with the Ashford coat of arms emblazoned on the doors. "Trouble," she murmured to herself. Adrian appeared in the library doorway a few minutes later, looking harried. "My cousin Margaret has arrived for a visit," he said. "She will be staying for several days. Should I make myself scarce?" "Absolutely not. You have every right to be here, and I will not have you hiding in your apartment as if you have done something wrong." But Eliza could see the tension in his face, and she knew that Lady Margaret's visit was going to complicate their already precarious situation. She met Lady Margaret that evening at dinner. Adrian had insisted that she join them in the formal dining room despite her protests that it was not appropriate. Lady Margaret was a handsome woman in her 40s, with silver-streaked hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She greeted Eliza with cool politeness, but her expression made it clear that she found the arrangement highly irregular. "So you are Adrian's assistant," she said as they took their seats. "How fascinating, and what exactly does your work entail?" "I help His Grace with his translation project, my lady," Eliza replied carefully. "We are working with a collection of Roman texts." "How wonderful! And where did you receive your education in Latin?" The question was delivered in a pleasant tone, but Eliza could hear the challenge beneath it. "I was taught by a vicar, my lady." "A vicar? How unusual. Most vicars are not qualified to teach classical languages to such an advanced level." "The Reverend Dr. Whitmore was an exceptional scholar," Eliza said quietly. "He had studied at Cambridge before taking his orders." It was a small lie, but she hoped it would satisfy Lady Margaret's curiosity. Unfortunately, it seemed to have the opposite effect. "Whitmore? I do not recall a Reverend Dr. Whitmore. Where was his parish?" "A small village, my lady. I doubt you would have heard of it." Lady Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly, but she let the matter drop for the moment. The rest of the dinner passed in stilted conversation, with Adrian doing his best to keep the topics neutral and Eliza saying as little as possible. After dinner, Adrian excused himself to show Lady Margaret to her rooms, leaving Eliza to make her own way back to the library. She was gathering her translation materials when she heard voices in the corridor outside. "I hope you know what you are doing, Adrian." Lady Margaret's voice carried clearly through the door. "I am not sure what you mean, Margaret. Do not play ignorant with me. The entire county is talking about your mysterious assistant, a young woman living unchaperoned in your house, working closely with you every day. Do you have any idea how it looks?" "It looks like I have hired someone to help me with my scholarly work. It looks like you are having an affair with a servant girl." There was a long pause before Adrian replied, "My personal affairs are my own concern, not when they threaten to bring scandal upon the family name." "Adrian, you are a duke. You have responsibilities to your title, to your heritage. You cannot simply follow your whims without considering the consequences." "What consequences are you referring to exactly?" "Society will never accept her, Adrian. Even if your feelings are genuine, even if you were to marry her, she would never be welcome in the circles you must move in. And what about children? Do you want to condemn your heirs to the whispers and speculation that will follow them all their lives?" Eliza pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp. "Marriage?" Lady Margaret was discussing the possibility of Adrian marrying her as if it were a real consideration rather than an impossible dream. "I think you are getting ahead of yourself, Margaret," Adrian said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I? Then you are not in love with her?" Another long pause. "That is not the point." "It is exactly the point. Adrian, I can see the way you look at her. I can see the way she looks at you. You are both already in too deep to extract yourselves without pain. What would you have me do? Send her away, give her a generous settlement, and help her find a position elsewhere. End this before it goes any further." "I will not abandon her, Margaret. She has nowhere else to go. She has wherever you choose to send her. You are a wealthy man, Adrian. You can afford to be generous. You do not understand. She is not just my assistant. She means everything to me." Lady Margaret's sigh was audible even through the door. "Then you must decide what is more important to you, your personal happiness or your duty to your position. Why can they not be the same thing?" Because you were born a duke. Adrian, that privilege comes with obligations, whether you like them or not. Their voices faded as they moved down the corridor, leaving Eliza alone with her racing thoughts. She had always known that a future with Adrian was impossible, but hearing it stated so boldly by someone who clearly cared about him made the reality hit home with devastating force. Lady Margaret was right. Adrian was a duke with responsibilities that extended far beyond his personal desires, and she was a servant with a scandalous past who would only bring him trouble if he continued to associate with her. The next morning, Eliza made her decision. She would leave Ravenshollow Manor before she caused any more damage to Adrian's reputation. She would find work somewhere far away, where no one knew her history, and where she could start fresh once again. She was packing her few belongings when Adrian appeared in her doorway. "What are you doing?" he asked, taking in the open traveling bag on her bed. "What I should have done weeks ago," Eliza replied without looking at him. "I am leaving." "Why?" "You know why. Your cousin is right. I am a threat to your reputation and your position." Adrian stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. "I do not care what Margaret thinks." "You should care. She is trying to protect you." "I do not need protection from you, Eliza." "Yes, you do." She finally turned to face him, and the pain in her eyes made him step back as if he had been struck. "I heard what she said last night, about marriage, about children, about the scandal I would bring to your family. She is right about all of it. She is wrong about what matters." "Is she?" "Adrian, think about what you would be giving up. Your place in society, your family's respect, your children's future. Is what we have together really worth all that?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "It is. You say that now, but what about in 5 years, 10 years? What about when the novelty wears off and you realize what you have sacrificed? That will never happen. You cannot know that." Adrian crossed the room and took her hands in his. "Eliza, I am going to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly." "What?" "Do you love me?" The simple question hung in the air between them. Eliza closed her eyes, trying to find the strength to lie, but she could not do it. "Yes," she whispered. "I love you." "Then marry me." Her eyes flew open. "What?" "Marry me, Eliza. Be my wife, my duchess, my partner in everything." "Adrian, you cannot be serious." "I have never been more serious about anything in my life." He dropped to one knee beside her bed, still holding her hands. "I know it will not be easy. I know there will be challenges and obstacles and people who disapprove. But I also know that I cannot imagine my life without you." Tears began to stream down Eliza's face. "It is impossible." "Nothing is impossible if we face it together. Your cousin will learn to accept it, or she will not. Either way, it is not her choice to make. Society will follow our lead. I am a duke, Eliza. If I say you are worthy of respect, then you are worthy of respect. And if they do not agree, then we will create our own society. We will fill this house with scholars and writers and thinkers who value intelligence and character over bloodlines and bank accounts." Despite her tears, Eliza found herself smiling. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple. We love each other. Everything else is just details to be worked out." "Adrian, I want to say yes. You have no idea how much I want to say yes. But I am terrified that I will ruin your life. And I am terrified that I will lose you if I do not try to make you mine." He lifted her hands to his lips and kissed them gently. "Take a leap of faith with me, Eliza. Trust that love really can conquer all." Eliza looked down at his earnest face and felt her carefully constructed walls finally crumble. She had spent 3 years running from her past, hiding from her feelings, protecting herself from the possibility of more pain. But Adrian was offering her something she had never dared to hope for, a chance at real happiness with someone who truly knew and accepted her. "Yes," she said quietly. "Yes, I will marry you." Adrian's face lit up with such joy that it took her breath away. He stood and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around the small room until they were both laughing and dizzy. "When?" he asked, setting her back on her feet, but not releasing her from his embrace. "When what? When will you marry me? Tomorrow? Next week? I do not want to wait any longer than necessary. Adrian, we need time to plan, to prepare. There are arrangements to be made." "What arrangements? We can be married by special license within a matter of days." "What about your cousin? What about the servants? What about announcing our engagement properly?" Adrian's expression grew more serious. "Are you having second thoughts?" "No," Eliza said quickly. "But I want to do this right. If we are going to shock society by marrying, let us at least give them no grounds to criticize the way we go about it." "You are right, of course." Adrian kissed her forehead tenderly. "We will do everything properly." "But Eliza?" "Yes, I meant what I said about not wanting to wait long. I have spent too many years of my life alone. Now that I have found you, I want to begin our real life together as soon as possible." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Lady Margaret, when informed of their engagement, had reacted with predictable dismay, but she had eventually agreed to help with the wedding preparations, rather than see Adrian married without any family present. "I still think you are making a mistake," she told him privately, "but I can see that you will not be dissuaded, so I will do what I can to help the marriage succeed." The wedding was planned for early December, which gave them time to make the necessary legal arrangements, and for Eliza to have a proper wedding dress made. Adrian insisted on a formal ceremony with all the traditional elements, despite Eliza's protests that it was unnecessary. "You will be a duchess," he said when she objected to the expense and elaborateness of the plans. "You deserve to be married like one." The transformation of her status from servant to bride-to-be was surreal. Suddenly she found herself being fitted for silk gowns instead of cleaning in them, consulting with the cook about menus instead of eating in the servants' hall, planning the decoration of rooms she had once been hired to dust. The servants' reactions to the engagement were mixed. Some seemed genuinely happy for their master, while others made little effort to hide their disapproval. Mrs. Hartwell maintained a stiffly correct demeanor that managed to convey both duty and displeasure. "It is not my place to question His Grace's decisions," she said when asked about the upcoming wedding. "I am sure Miss Thornfield will make an interesting duchess." But there were bright spots as well. The younger housemaids seemed enchanted by the romantic nature of the situation, and cook went out of her way to prepare special dishes for Eliza's approval. "It is like something out of a fairy tale," one of the maids confided to Eliza as she was being fitted for her wedding dress. "A servant girl marrying a duke. It gives the rest of us hope." The comment made Eliza smile, but it also reminded her of the weight of responsibility she was taking on. She was not just marrying Adrian, she was setting an example for every servant girl who had ever dreamed of something better. 2 weeks before the wedding, Eliza received an unexpected visitor. She was in the library working on the final sections of the Roman translations when Mrs. Hartwell announced that a lady wished to see her. "A lady?" Eliza looked up from her work in surprise. "What lady?" "She says her name is Miss Catherine Whitmore. She claims to be the daughter of the vicar who educated you." Eliza's heart leaped. Catherine had been like a sister to her during her years with the vicar, and she had missed her desperately since leaving Millbrook. "Please show her in immediately." Catherine entered the library looking older and more refined than Eliza remembered, but her face broke into a radiant smile when she saw her old friend. "Eliza, or should I say, your grace-to-be." They embraced warmly, and Eliza felt tears of joy spring to her eyes. "Catherine, what are you doing here? How did you find me?" "Word of your engagement has reached even our quiet corner of the world," Catherine replied with a laugh. "When I heard that Miss Eliza Thornfield was marrying the Duke of Ravenshollow, I knew it had to be you. No one else could possibly have convinced a duke to fall in love with her through her knowledge of Latin. I can hardly believe it myself." "Oh, but I can. You were always special, Eliza. Even as a child, you had a quality that set you apart. Father always said you were destined for great things." The mention of the vicar brought back a flood of memories, both happy and painful. "How is your father, Catherine?" Catherine's expression grew sad. "He died last spring, I am afraid, peacefully, in his sleep. But he never stopped talking about you, never stopped wondering what had become of his brightest pupil." "I am so sorry," Eliza said, squeezing her friend's hands. "He was like a father to me. He knew that, and he understood why you had to leave, even if some others did not. Catherine, there is something I must tell you about the debts." "What debts?" "Father left no debts when he died. His affairs were all in order." Eliza stared at her in confusion. "But Reverend Morton said—" "Reverend Morton," Catherine's expression darkened. "What did that horrible man tell you?" "He said your father owed nearly £50 to various creditors and that I was responsible for paying them. That is absolute nonsense. Father was very careful with money, and he certainly did not die in debt." "What else did Morton tell you?" Eliza recounted her encounter with the Reverend, watching as Catherine's face grew more and more angry. "The villain!" Catherine exclaimed when Eliza had finished. "He was trying to extract money from you under false pretenses. Father caught him embezzling church funds shortly before his death and threatened to expose him unless he returned what he had stolen. Morton must have thought he could use you to recoup his losses. But he had documents forged, I am sure. Morton was always clever with a pen." Catherine shook her head in disgust. "Thank goodness your duke paid him off and sent him packing. If he had succeeded in taking you away, I would never have found my happiness," Eliza finished quietly. "Exactly. It seems fate was determined to see you settled properly, no matter what obstacles appeared in your path." They spent the rest of the afternoon catching up on the years they had been apart. Catherine had married a country doctor and was blissfully happy with her quiet domestic life, but she was clearly thrilled by Eliza's more dramatic turn of fortune. "I have brought you something," Catherine said as she prepared to leave. She pulled a small wrapped package from her traveling bag and pressed it into Eliza's hands. "What is it?" "Open it and see." Inside the package was a small leather-bound book that Eliza recognized immediately. It was her father's Bible, the one she had carried with her from her childhood home to the vicarage and then lost in her hasty flight from Millbrook. "How did you—" "Father found it in the garden after you left. You must have dropped it in your haste. He kept it safe all these years, hoping to return it to you someday." Eliza held the Bible to her chest, overwhelmed by emotion. It was the last tangible link to her parents, and she had thought it was gone forever. "There is something else," Catherine said softly. "Look inside the front cover." Eliza opened the book carefully. There, in her father's familiar handwriting, was an inscription she had never seen before. "For my beloved daughter, Elizabeth, may you always remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made, precious in the sight of God, and worthy of every good thing this life has to offer. Your loving father, Thomas Ashworth." "He wrote that shortly before he died," Catherine explained. "Mother found it among his papers after the consumption took them both. He must have intended to give it to you when you were older." Eliza could not speak through her tears. The inscription seemed like a message from beyond the grave, a blessing on the new life she was about to begin. "Thank you," she finally managed to whisper. "This means more to me than I can say." "You deserve every happiness, Eliza," Catherine said, embracing her one last time. "Your parents would be so proud of the woman you have become." The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with frost covering the gardens and a thin layer of ice on the windows. Eliza woke early in her apartment above the library, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness that made it impossible to eat the breakfast Catherine had brought her. "You look pale," Catherine observed as she helped Eliza into her wedding dress. "Are you having second thoughts?" "No," Eliza said firmly. "I am just overwhelmed by how much my life is about to change." The dress was beautiful. Ivory silk, with delicate lace trim and seed pearls sewn along the bodice. Lady Margaret had insisted on paying for it, along with a matching veil that had belonged to Adrian's mother. "His Grace wanted you to wear the family diamonds," Catherine said, fastening a necklace around Eliza's throat. "But I told him you would prefer something simpler for your first time wearing such grand jewelry." The necklace was indeed simpler than the elaborate family pieces, but it was still the most expensive thing Eliza had ever worn. The diamonds caught the light and sparkled like captured stars against her skin. "I do not look like myself," she said, staring at her reflection in the mirror. "You look like a duchess," Catherine replied with a smile, "which is exactly what you are about to become." The ceremony was held in the chapel at Ravenshollow Manor, with the local vicar officiating and a small gathering of friends and neighbours in attendance. Lady Margaret had managed to convince several prominent families to attend, despite the unusual circumstances, and Eliza was touched by the effort she had made. But all of Eliza's attention was focused on Adrian as she walked down the aisle toward him. He was dressed in formal black, with a white waistcoat, and his face was radiant with joy as he watched her approach. When she reached his side, he took her hands in his and whispered, "You are beautiful." The ceremony itself passed in a blur of vows and prayers and blessings. Eliza found herself responding automatically to the familiar words, her mind still struggling to accept that this was really happening. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Adrian kissed her gently, and the assembled guests applauded with what seemed like genuine warmth. The wedding breakfast that followed was elegant but intimate, with speeches that were mercifully brief and toasts that made Eliza blush with their generous sentiments. Lady Margaret gave a particularly gracious speech in which she welcomed Eliza to the family and expressed her confidence that the new Duchess would bring great credit to the Ravenshollow name. As the afternoon wore on and the guests began to take their leave, Eliza found herself standing in the main hall of the manor, greeting people as the Duchess of Ravenshollow for the first time. The title still felt foreign on her tongue, but she was beginning to believe that she might actually be able to carry it with dignity. "How are you holding up?" Adrian asked, slipping his arm around her waist as the last of the guests departed. "I think I am still in shock," Eliza admitted. "This morning I was Miss Thornfield, and now I am your Grace." "You are still the same woman I fell in love with," Adrian said softly. "The title does not change who you are inside." "I hope not. I hope I can be worthy of it." "You already are." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set through the tall windows of the hall. The house felt different now that it was truly their home, warm and welcoming in a way it had never been when Eliza was just an employee. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we finish the translation project," Adrian said with a smile. "And then we begin the rest of our lives together. And if the rest of the world does not approve, then we will prove them wrong. We will show them that love and respect and intellectual partnership matter more than bloodlines and bank accounts." Eliza leaned into her husband's embrace and felt the last of her fears melting away. She had spent so many years running from her past, hiding from the possibility of hurt. But Adrian had taught her that some things were worth the risk, that some dreams were worth fighting for. "I love you," she said simply. "And I love you," he replied, "my Duchess, my partner, my dearest friend." The translation project was completed 3 months after their wedding, and the resulting book was published to considerable acclaim. The reviews praised both the scholarly quality of the translations and the fresh insights they provided into Roman daily life. Several prominent historians wrote to congratulate Adrian on his work, and there was talk of the book being adopted for use in university courses. But the success that meant the most to Eliza was more personal. Adrian had insisted that her name appear on the title page as co-translator, giving her scholarly recognition in her own right. It was a bold move that raised some eyebrows in academic circles, but it also established her as a serious scholar rather than just the Duke's wife. "You earned this recognition," Adrian said, when she expressed concern about the attention her name on the book was receiving. "Your insights and expertise were essential to the project's success." The book's publication also brought them invitations to present their work at various scholarly societies and universities. At first, Eliza was terrified at the prospect of speaking in public about their research, but Adrian's encouragement and her own growing confidence helped her overcome her fears. Their first joint presentation at the Royal Society in London was a tremendous success. Eliza spoke about the challenges of translating cultural concepts that had no direct English equivalent, while Adrian discussed the historical significance of the texts they had uncovered. The audience was clearly impressed by their collaboration, and several scholars approached them afterward to discuss potential future projects. "You were magnificent," Adrian told her as they returned to their hotel that evening. "I was terrified," Eliza admitted, "but also exhilarated. I never imagined that I would be able to share my ideas with such distinguished scholars." "This is only the beginning," Adrian said. "We have proven that we can work together as intellectual equals. Now we can take on even more ambitious projects." Their success in scholarly circles helped to ease Eliza's acceptance in society more generally. It was one thing for the tongue to whisper about a duke who had married his servant. It was quite another to dismiss a woman who was making genuine contributions to academic knowledge. Gradually, the invitations began to arrive, first to scholarly events, then to more general social gatherings. Lady Margaret proved to be an invaluable ally in navigating the complex world of high society. She took it upon herself to introduce Eliza to the right people and to guide her through the intricate social protocols that governed aristocratic life. "You must remember that you are no longer trying to fit in," she told Eliza during one of their coaching sessions. "You are a duchess now. Others must accommodate themselves to you, not the other way around." It was a difficult adjustment for someone who had spent years trying to be invisible, but Eliza gradually learned to carry herself with the confidence that her new position required. She discovered that she had a natural talent for conversation and that her unusual background often made her more interesting to people rather than less. The first major test of her social standing came at the spring ball hosted by the Duke and Duchess of Marlborough. It was one of the most important events of the London season, and an invitation was considered a mark of high social approval. Eliza spent weeks preparing for the event, working with Lady Margaret to choose the perfect gown and jewellery. The dress they selected was a deep blue silk that complemented her dark hair and eyes, worn with the Raven's Hollow diamond tiara that had belonged to Adrian's grandmother. "You look every inch a duchess," Adrian said as they prepared to depart for the ball. "I feel like I am playing a part in a theatrical production," Eliza replied nervously. "Then play it well, and soon it will become second nature." The ballroom at Marlborough House was magnificent, glittering with chandeliers, and filled with the most prominent members of London society. As Adrian and Eliza were announced, Eliza felt all eyes turned toward them, and she heard the whispers that followed in their wake. But as the evening progressed, she found herself relaxing and even enjoying the experience. Her conversations were lively and engaging, and several people made a point of complimenting her on the translation project. By the end of the night, she felt that she had successfully passed her first major social test. "You were wonderful," Adrian said, as their carriage rolled through the London streets toward their townhouse. "I was so proud watching you tonight." "It was not as difficult as I expected," Eliza admitted. "Once I stopped worrying about what people thought of me and started focusing on what I thought of them, everything became much easier." "That is the secret to dealing with society," Adrian said with a laugh. "Most of them are far more concerned with their own standing than they are with judging yours." As their first year of marriage progressed, Eliza settled into her role as Duchess with increasing confidence. She took an active interest in the management of the estate, learning about tenant relations and agricultural practices. She also began to use her position to support causes that were important to her, particularly the education of young women from working-class families. "There are so many girls like I was," she told Adrian as they discussed her plans for a scholarship fund. "Girls with quick minds and eager hearts who will never have the chance to develop their potential because of their circumstances. Then we will give them that chance," Adrian replied. "We will create opportunities for them to learn and grow." The scholarship program they established became one of Eliza's greatest sources of pride. They provided funding for exceptional girls from poor families to receive proper educations, and Eliza took personal interest in mentoring several of the recipients. Their marriage continued to deepen and strengthen as they shared not only their work, but also their dreams and aspirations. They traveled together to research sites in Italy and Greece, combining scholarship with adventure. They hosted gatherings at Ravenshollow Manor that brought together some of the most interesting minds of their generation. But perhaps most importantly, they created a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Adrian never tried to diminish Eliza's intellectual contributions or to make her feel that her ideas were less valuable than his own, and Eliza learned to trust in Adrian's love and commitment, to believe that he would never abandon her or treat her as anything less than his equal. 2 years after their wedding, Eliza discovered that she was expecting their first child. The news filled them both with joy and excitement, though Eliza also felt a familiar flutter of anxiety about the future. "What if society does not accept our children?" she asked Adrian one evening as they sat by the fire in their private sitting room. "What if the circumstances of our marriage follow them throughout their lives? Then we will raise them to be strong enough to overcome any obstacles," Adrian replied, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "We will teach them to value character over convention, substance over superficiality. And if that is not enough, it will be enough. Our children will be raised with love and education and confidence. They will know their own worth, regardless of what others might say." The baby, a daughter they named Catherine in honor of Eliza's dear friend, was born the following spring. She was a healthy, beautiful child with Adrian's dark hair and Eliza's expressive eyes, and she was welcomed into the world with tremendous joy. Lady Margaret, who had become a devoted aunt despite her initial reservations about the marriage, was one of the first visitors to the nursery. "She is perfect," she said, holding the baby with practiced ease. "And she will grow up knowing that anything is possible if she has the courage to pursue it." "Just as her mother did," Adrian added, smiling at Eliza as she recovered from the birth. As Eliza held her daughter for the first time, she thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. From the frightened servant girl counting coins in a cold room to the Duchess cradling her newborn child in silk-draped comfort, it seemed like a fairy tale too good to be true. But it was true, and it was hers. She had learned that love really could overcome the barriers of class and circumstance, that courage and determination could create opportunities where none had existed before. Most importantly, she had learned that she was worthy of happiness, worthy of respect, worthy of the life she had built with the man who had first discovered her reading ancient Latin in his library. "What are you thinking about?" Adrian asked softly, settling beside her on the bed. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Eliza replied. "How fortunate we both are to have found each other." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Adrian said, kissing her forehead gently. "It was destiny. You were meant to come to my library, meant to reveal your talents, meant to become my partner in every sense of the word." Eliza smiled and looked down at their sleeping daughter. "Then I suppose destiny has excellent taste in love stories." "The best," Adrian agreed, "and this is only the beginning of ours." Outside the windows of Raven's Hollow Manor, spring was painting the gardens in shades of green and gold. Inside, a duchess who had once cleaned library shelves for coins held her baby daughter close and marveled at the power of love to transform even the most impossible dreams into beautiful reality. She had discovered that she could read ancient Latin, but more importantly, she had discovered that she could write her own future in any language she chose. The translation that had brought them together was complete, but the life they had built together was still being written, one day of love and partnership and shared dreams at a time. And if Eliza had learned anything from her years of studying ancient texts, it was that the best stories were the ones that honored both the past and the future, that celebrated both individual achievement and the power of two hearts united in common purpose. She had cleaned his library for coins, but she had stayed for love. And in the end, that had made all the difference.